இவ்வளவு காலம் வந்து இந்த இயற்கை எவ்வளோ பாதிப்படைஞ்சிருக்கிறது வந்து எங்களோட யாருக்குமே தெரியல. அதனால் வந்து நாங்கள் இயற்கைக்கு இப்போ நிறைய குழப்பங்களை செய்திருக்கிறோம். அதனால் இங்கே வந்து நாங்கள் நிறைய பிரச்சனைகளை அறிஞ்சு அதுக்கான தீர்வுகளையும் கண்டுபிடிச்சிருக்கிறோம். இது வந்து எங்களுக்கு பெரிய ஒரு யூஸ்ஃபுல்லாக இருக்குது.
இதுக்கு அனுசரணை தந்த NDP வங்கிக்கும் நன்றியை கூறிக்கொண்டு நன்றி.
Hello and welcome to another Youth Wing Skills Workshop. It's right on the dot 4 p.m. so I think we can get started now. As always, I would like to recognize and thank our sponsors, NDB Bank, who have partnered with the Youth Wing since its inception in 2018. And without them, we wouldn't really be doing a lot of the work we do. In that short clip, you got a short snippet on some of the work we have done in the past when we could travel in the north, especially. I would also like to encourage you, in case you're not a member already of the Society of the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society, do take up membership, and membership forms can be downloaded and filled in and submitted online on our website nowadays. The Youth Wing have also got another interesting skills workshop that is coming up on the 14th of August. So mark your calendars for the 14th. We have Dr. Rushira Somavira, who will be speaking about the fascinating world of reptiles. The WNPS is currently running a photography competition for elephants. So if you have any great pictures about elephants, this is for all of you out there, adults and all the young children online today as well. Please do submit an entry, and that can also be done on our website. So please log in and do submit and send in your photographs. As always, I would also like to encourage you to Instagram post, Facebook post, tweet about the event, what you learn about today, take screenshots and share it with us. And always remember to tag us, the WNPS and the WNPS Youth Wing, because we love to see those posts online as well. I don't want to waste too much time, but in terms of the structure of the event today, we will be having the speaker give a presentation, and we will follow this up with a main Q&A. So I encourage you to keep your questions till the end of the talk and then share them in the chat box, and I will be happy to take them and put them to the speaker today. So to the speaker today, we have James Souchon, who is the head ranger at the renowned Londolozi Private Game Reserve in South Africa. James heads up the ranging and tracking teams at the reserve with a special focus on guide training. Today, he's going to speak to us about his personal experiences as a guide and give us an inside look at how the Londolozi Tracker Academy helps preserve the ancient art of tracking in the bush. I'm sure this is going to be a very exciting session, and there's a lot we're going to learn from him. So over to you, James. It's our pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Zainab. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you nicely, nice and loud and clear.
Perfect. And hello to everyone. I was just sitting here watching all those images come up and just marveling at the fact that I can be sitting in the middle of the African bush in my house here and chatting to all of you across the world in Sri Lanka. So it's an honor and a privilege, and thank you very much to the WNPS for having me today. Let me start off by just sharing the screen here. So let me start off by just telling you a little bit about myself. My name is James Souchon, as you heard, and currently, as Zainab said, I work at Londolozi Private Game Reserve in the heart of the Sabi Sand, which is a bigger game reserve, and that's part of the greater Kruger National Park region, so right up in the northeastern parts of South Africa. Before I get into talking about tracking and my experiences with tracking and some of the top trackers that I've had the privilege to learn from, I just thought I'd start off by giving you a little bit of my background and how I got to this point. So I grew up in an area of South Africa known as KwaZulu-Natal. It's on the east coast of South Africa, and more specifically a town there called Durban. So the province itself is renowned for its biodiversity, all over, and I spent a lot of time as a kid going to some of the national parks up in the northern parts of the province. So reserves, it's called Shlui and Londolozi. It's quite a mouthful. And I was very lucky enough to have parents that who loved the bush and the natural world just as much as I did. And they were certainly the early influences in my life when it came to getting a love and appreciation for the natural world. Myself and my sister would go to these places, and we would love listening to all the stories from the people that worked there, local Zulu trackers and guides who would imitate bird calls and keep us entertained with stories from their adventures in the bush. And that was where my love for the bush began. After that, I went to school, and following school, I moved down to Cape Town to study. And funny enough, I didn't study anything conservation related or scientific, biology, nothing like that. I studied politics, philosophy, and economics. It was a Bachelor of Social Sciences. So nothing that could really put me in good stead for the bush. And I sort of put my dream of working in the bush and living in the bush on hold a bit. I, for whatever reason, thought that once I finished studying, would go off and find a job in the city. And as all my friends started joining graduate recruitment programs and, getting into their sort of working world, I just was not motivated to follow that same route. And at that point, guiding, I regarded more as a bit of a gap year job, go and get some vacation work and earn a little bit of money on the side, and I'll take a year off and go and find myself in the wilderness, and then I'll come back to the city and carry on whatever career I can find at that point. But luckily that was not the case, and the moment I started guiding, I absolutely fell in love with it, and just wanted more and more. And the longer as each year went by, I realized that what I had learned was only not even scratching the surface of what is out there to learn. And so the first reserve I moved to was a reserve called Phinda. It's a private game reserve, again, in the northern parts of KwaZulu-Natal. And that's where I cut my teeth in the guiding world. I spent 4 wonderful years there in an area that was famed for its biodiversity. Could learn about a number of different animals and birds and trees and plants in a variety of different habitats. And that is where my sort of journey began. And after 4 years there, I'd always wanted and had dreamed about moving up to the area around the Kruger National Park. It's probably the most famous game reserve in Africa. And in particular, Londolozi, it lies in a group of private game reserves on the western edge of the Kruger National Park. And there's no boundary between the reserves, and the whole area is one that I'd only ever seen documented in early videos made by famous trackers known as Almon Mhlongo and John Varty, who would video themselves tracking and finding leopards in this area. And so I'd always heard of Londolozi from the childhood videos that I'd watched, and it was a dream to work there. And so in the beginning of 2016, I packed up my things and moved up to Londolozi, and now I've been there almost 6 years and currently head up the guiding team as well as the tracking team. And I'm privileged enough to learn, especially from the trackers, daily. A lot of them have been here for a lot longer than I have, and I can only dream of having the skills that they have one day. So definitely not in their league. So that's very briefly a little bit about myself. And the talk today that I want to chat to you about is about tracking. What is tracking? It's a very broad term. What makes a top tracker? In terms of characteristics and skills, where tracking came from and how it's got to where it is today. And then what's also being done to preserve this ancient craft that's being lost a little bit in our sort of modern day society. So we'll kick off by just looking at this first slide and focusing on what actually is tracking. So it's a very broad term. And in short, you could say that tracking is a way to gather evidence or clues from an animal that's been left behind in order to find that animal. Often people think of tracking and they just think of the footprint or the pug mark that an animal leaves behind. And you can see in that bottom left slide, that is where a female leopard went to drink at a pool in the river. But it's so much more than just looking for those pug marks or those tracks. There are so many different clues that animals, and I'm talking all animals, from birds to insects to the bigger and more famous predators and big five animals. Every animal leaves behind a clue, and the top trackers know how to identify those clues. So some of the more obvious ones, if we look at top left there, that is the white scat from a hyena. Hyenas, they eat a lot of bones, they're scavengers, and they'll crunch on a lot of bones, and calcium eventually turns their scat white. So that's one of the signs that get left behind on the top right there, and that is where a porcupine was killed by a leopard. And so bits of bone fragment, quills, there's fur left behind here. Often the signs aren't as obvious as that, and looking for leftover hair can be, where a male lion has walked through a path and his mane has got snagged on a thorn tree, and you left with a little bit of hair from his mane, and the top trackers are able to identify that. It's not just visible clues, and if you look in the bottom right picture, that's a leopard scent marking. So turning around and leaving its scent behind on that bush, and when you smell it, it's actually quite interesting, and I hope I don't ruin buttered popcorn for you, but that is the smell of a leopard's scent when it sprays onto the bush. So those are just some of the obvious ones. The next slide is probably as a novice tracker, it's probably the most exciting clue that I can pick up, and it's where a leopard has killed something and it's dragged it, and they often will drag it to hoist it up into a tree so that it's safe from hyenas and lions. And you can see in that top left picture that obvious drag mark behind it. So as a novice tracker, when you find that drag mark in a lovely sand and you can see it clearly, there's a very good chance on the other end of that drag mark is a leopard. And when you follow those tracks, you do feel like you've mastering the art of tracking. I'm going to play you a video. It's a little bit gory, so do excuse that, but it's of a leopard dragging a fully grown impala, and it just gives you an idea of the strength of these animals. So you can imagine that female leopard will drag that carcass for as long as it needs for her to get it to a tree, where she will then carry it straight up that tree, showing incredible strength and leaving behind little bits of fur, tracks, those drag marks. It's one of the very exciting clues to follow in the bush. In terms of an audible clue, the impala, which you see here, is probably the most successful antelope throughout Africa, and we find them in great numbers on the reserve here. A trained tracker will, be in tune to the noises of the bush, and one of the exciting noises to listen for is this one. Excuse the wind noise there, but that alarm call that you hear is made when the impala is in distress and it's spotted a leopard, and these impalas in fact had just seen that leopard from the previous slide kill a female impala in the herd, and they were all alarm calling at it. So when you're driving along or you're walking and you switched off and you hear that noise, you've got to get there as quickly as can to find whatever is causing the distress. And it's not just impalas. A lot of the prey species do let out different types of alarm calls, and they'll let out different alarm calls depending on what predator is there, which is quite phenomenal. So for example, a squirrel, which is very small and has a lot of enemies in the bush, will alarm call for big birds of prey, will alarm call for snakes, as well as leopard. And they'll have a different frequency in the tone of that alarm call. And the top trackers are able to differentiate that. And it sounds easy, but I've tried. After 10 years of guiding, I still get it wrong quite a few times. So, that's pretty much what is tracking in a nutshell. And in order for us to, talk more about it, we have to look at the roots of the modern day tracker that we see today. Where did these skills come from? And we can track it back to ancient tribes, hunter-gatherers throughout Africa over the last tens of thousands of years. I'm going to speak specifically to this group of people that you see in the images, and they are known as the Khoisan people. They were the first people into South Africa. And in fact, 22,000 years ago, they actually made up the largest population of people on the planet at that stage. Granted, there weren't that many people on the planet. There are a lot less now, and there's, with the hunter-gatherers, there's not as much of a need for hunter-gathering as there was back then, for various reasons that we'll go into a little bit later. But these people were renowned for their incredible knowledge of the natural world and insights into the environment around them. People that have spent time with them in the bush talk about how they're always nibbling on something as they walk through the bush. They come from very dry, arid landscapes, but somehow they're able, where we would see wood and soil and just a plain old plant, they see a meal or a medicine. They've been able to scour the earth and come up with hundreds of different remedies for all sorts of ailments that have all been recorded, and their intuition and tracking skills are second to none. When you need to hunt and kill for your own survival, you master that skill pretty quickly. And they're one of their and there's some incredible documentaries on this group of Khoisan people, is they would track down antelope for days at a time, just following those subtle clues that can easily get overlooked. And eventually they'll catch up to it and they'll tire it down, and they'll shoot it with their poison tip arrows that they've been able to make. And that's how they will provide for their families. But as I mentioned, today the need for the typical hunter-gatherer is almost non-existent. If we look at rapid urbanization, urban sprawl, loss of habitat, etc., there's a huge threat of this ancient skill being lost in today's society. But all hope is not lost just yet, because throughout Africa, and I'm going to talk specifically to South Africa and the national parks and the private reserves that we have today, there exists a specialist group of trackers. And you'll see some of these pictures that come up now. For example, the three people that you see on the left, they've got a combined experience of over 150 years of tracking in the bush. And it's this group of specialist trackers that we're privileged to work with here at Londolozi. And it's the legacy of those early hunter-gatherers and that skill that still lives on through them today. Granted, the type of tracking has changed quite a bit. These guys aren't taking days to try and track down a large antelope to feed their families. They are tracking day in and day out, trying to find Africa's big five animals, the iconic leopard, lion, buffalo, rhino, elephant, and so much more. And they are trying to do that in order to show paying guests from around the world some of these incredible animals. So it helps with research as well, monitoring. Scientists make use of these guys to track leopards. And as a result, we've been able to document leopards for longer than a lot of other places in the world. Also, anti-poaching efforts. Unfortunately, that's one of the harsh realities that we have to deal with in these wild spaces. And the skill that these guys have to track not only animals, but people as well is very, very impressive. And so today I want to talk about some of these trackers and what has made them legends of the industry. The first place that I do need to start, talking of the top trackers and legends of the industry, I would not be able to do that without special focus on this man right here. So to give you a little bit of a brief history of Londolozi, it was founded in 1926. This whole area that we find ourselves in used to be cattle ranches that became incredibly overgrazed, and it was an inhospitable area. It was wild. There were lions and other game that existed here as well. And there was two gentlemen by the name of Charles Boyd Varty and Frank Unger from Johannesburg, and they decided they were keen for an African adventure, and they bought this land for a very tiny amount of money back then. and they traveled up here. And in those days, the sport of the time was hunting lions. And it hasn't been the case for 50 years or so now, but that was part of their daily life. And they wanted to come and spend the dry winters up in these parts hunting lions. And they went into the Kruger National Park, which was proclaimed in the same year, 1926. And they met some people there who told them that if they want to find lions, they need to hire this man, Winus Matibula. So he's regarded as the father of tracking here at Londolozi. And he also grew up a hunter-gatherer. His only way of surviving was living off this land, and much like the early Khoisan people did. Dave Varty, who's one of the current owners of Londolozi today, he spent a lot of time with this man growing up when he was a boy. And he said that this person, this tracker, Winus, had an incredible ability to find animals. He possessed a set of skills that no one else had. He talked about this man, Winus, having a second sight, what we would refer to today as intuition. I'm going to unpack intuition a little bit more as we go along and how that's such a vital characteristic of a tracker. But he knew the lay of the land and animal behavior so well that he could abandon tracks. So imagine he's following tracks of a lion, and the tracks are clear as day on the path to him. But he's picked up a whole lot of other little clues along the way that are easily overlooked by everyone. And he abandons the tracks because he's in the mind of that male lion, and he had an incredible knack to abandon tracks, loop around, and anticipate where that animal was going. He was also a man that people said was impossible to kill. And from all accounts, he had many a close shave with death. And I'll tell you one interesting story of him, and it would have been the early days. He was sitting around a campfire at the lodge with some of the other members of staff. And there was a man called Simeon who was seated next to him. And they were a good few beers down and laughing around the fire and having a great time, when out of the bushes next in the shadows came a 3-meter long black mamba. And for those of you who don't know what a black mamba is, it's regarded as one of the most venomous snakes in Africa. And at 3 meters, 4 meters, that's a sizable snake. And black mambas are renowned for being incredibly nervous snakes. And when panicked or startled, they will lash out. And they've got an incredibly strong neurotoxic venom, which affects your respiratory system. So not a snake that you want to be messing around with. And anyway, these men were sitting around the fire, and the snake came in and panicked because as they saw it, it was absolute chaos, and they all ran off in different directions. The snake reared its head and bit into Simeon, who was seated next to Winus. And as it bit into Simeon, it lifted up, and as Winus was trying to get away, it got him in his back, in his lower back. And on hearing the commotion, Dave Varty walked in to the boma, and when he realized that it was a black mamba that had bitten 2 of the people that he cared for, and he was incredibly nervous and was immediately trying to work out how to get them some help. And when things settled a bit and they had a closer look at the bite wounds, they looked onto Simeon's belt, and there was venom dripping off the belt. And that is what the snake had latched onto. Somehow it had missed every bit of exposed flesh or other part of the body, and it hit the belt, and it had expelled all of its venom onto that belt. And so when it turned around to bite Winus in the small of the back, there was no venom. It was a dry bite, and he was able to live another day and have an incredible, incredible story to tell. So there's many stories of Winus and his brushes with death, and escaping buffalo in the river, being trampled by buffalo, and his wife saving him by throwing a boulder onto the buffalo from on top of a riverbank that she was standing on. He, by all accounts, some would say lucky, others would say intuition, whatever it is. He is the stuff of legend around here. And he went on to live to the age of 85 and spent over 50 years as part of the Londolozi family living and tracking on this land. And so his spirit very much lives on today in the trackers that still track on this land. And some trackers have come and gone in the time that Winus was here, spending decades honing the craft and passing on the legacy that Winnis left behind. So a lot of our modern day trackers, they have gained this knowledge from Winnis that's been passed on from generation to generation. And some have become legends in their own right. And what we have learned from Winnis in particular is what it takes to be a top tracker. And as I mentioned, there have been a couple of other people that I would, put in this bracket of being known as a top tracker. And that's what I'm going to try and unpack now, is what are the traits of being a top tracker? So we all know there's an element of physicality. Winnis was a strong man, a weathered man. He spent many hours in the sun. And one thing that I learned very quickly is that there is quite a strong part of being a good tracker is physicality. I set off with a group of trackers one morning. I didn't have guests, and so I thought I'd go and take a casual morning stroll with them, and maybe we could find a leopard or a rhino. And I thought it would be an hour or two tops, and then I'd be back at the lodge and enjoy a lovely breakfast. How wrong I was. And we set off first light, and we got onto tracks of a rhino that we were looking for. And it was a bull rhino that had decided that this was going to be the morning he was going to do a massive territorial patrol of his area. But these trackers were focused, and they were hell-bent on finding this rhino. And if you've ever seen bloodhounds on the trail of a scent where they just do not give up, this was the group of people that I was dealing with that morning. Long story short, we spent about 6 hours out in the hot African sun with no food, a little bit of water, and eventually we did find the rhino. And at that moment, it all became all right. So there is a strong element of physicality. Sharp eyes and solid hearing is also a given. It's more than just being able to spot things. It's being able to pick up on the clues that are being given off far away, those distant alarm calls that I spoke about earlier, being able to spot a camouflage leopard in the long grass. So there are those elements to tracking, but physicality does not make a top tracker. It's so much more than that. A large part of it is the mental game. So the ability to be able to think rationally, to have a deeper level of knowledge about animal behavior than anyone else. A knowledge that you can't gain by just picking up a book and reading. It takes years and years of strong observational skills, the attention to the tiniest level of detail. And it's all well and good having those two abilities, but also the memory, have a good memory, to be able to recollect all of those little clues and observations that you have gathered over multiple amount of years, decades in fact, and to be able to access those memories and those little bits of knowledge that you have observed, to be able to access that in an instant when provided with a clue that you need to follow up on. The top trackers are able to put themselves into the mind of a leopard that you're looking for. They need to understand how this female leopard moves through her territory at night. They need to have a brilliant idea of the lay of the land, what motivates her. So the top trackers are able to use all of what I've just said to get into the mind of an animal and picture where it's walking, where it's going. Patience is also critical, which a lesson that I learned very quickly as well, and still have a tendency to try and rush things. You cannot rush in the bush. It's dangerous. It is a very dangerous place to rush. It takes years and years and years to foster these skills and to even start to understand what these skills really mean. One of what I would say is, out of all the top trackers that I've been fortunate enough to spend some time with, they've all got one thing in common, and that is they've never lost their thirst for knowledge and their curiosity of the natural world. And I'm going to use these pictures to tell you a story about a man, Rich in Tabina. So Rich and I have been privileged enough, or I've been privileged enough to work with him for about 5.5 years now. We've spent hours and hours together in the bush. He's not an old man, he's in his mid-30s, but he's been tracking for a good 14, 15 years. So as far as trackers go, he's got some solid experience behind him, and he's right at the top of his game, and only going to get better and better as the years go on. But Rich has never lost his thirst for knowledge or his curiosity. And in fact, I do have to rein it in sometimes, because when you're trying to find lions and leopards, which is, let's be honest, is what most people want to see straight away when they get to the bush, Rich stops me for every single bird that he sees flying off on the road up ahead. And the reason being is he wants to go and see what those tracks are and what they look like left behind. So this was a recent example. It was a group of red-billed oxpeckers, birds that you usually associate with on herds of buffalo or giraffe or impala. They spend a lot of time on these animals gleaning the ticks off of them. They get a lot of parasites themselves, and dust bathing is one of the ways they use to clean themselves. So they'll land on the road and they'll ruffle up their feathers and get the dust over them and smother out all the ticks and the parasites that are clinging to their feathers. But that action alone leaves a distinctive track in the sand. And Rich wants to learn from watching those oxpeckers what that track looks like. So when those birds have taken off and no one knows they're around, and Rich is on the trail of something, if it might be a herd of buffalo or a rhino, he looks down and he sees the scuff mark in the sand, and he can work out that that is where an oxpecker has been dust bathing itself and flown off. So the signs are still quite fresh, and he uses that as a clue to find the bigger animal. And it's not that he hasn't seen this behavior before, but he wants to know more. He wants to know if the red-billed oxpecker tracks look different to the yellow-billed oxpecker tracks, similar species of bird that's also found in the area, and then how those tracks differ from other birds. So it's a never-ending quest to know more. And that for me is synonymous with all the top trackers. Right when they're at the end of their days and retiring and spending time at home, even then they've still got that thirst for knowledge, that I want to know more. I'm never going to stop learning. That is crucial. Another man that I want to speak about, and probably the closest tracker or person that I've witnessed being as similar to what I was told about Winnis Matibula. We spoke about that second sight, that intuition. I have never seen it quite the same that I have with this man. So he is known as, his name is Freddie Ingobeni, and he's one of the trackers here at Londolozi. He's been here for decades as well. And it was a couple of years back now, Freddie and I were working together, and we had a lovely couple from America who were on the vehicle. They were our guests, and we were exploring part of the reserve that I hadn't spent that much time in. And I was chatting away with the guest, completely absorbed in conversation, and I noticed Freddie's hand just go up like this, which is the indicator that I must stop the vehicle, that he's seen something. And I stopped the car and I switched off, and I looked at him, and he had his face scrunched up, and he was scrutinizing a track in the sand. And you can see that track in the top right picture. It's the track of a female leopard. And he spotted that track. The track was heading in the same direction that the vehicle was heading. And immediately he also started to look around, and he announced to me that it's a track of a female leopard, and he thinks that it's fairly fresh. If I'd been driving there without Freddie, look, on a good day, I would have been able to spot the leopard track on the road, the first clue. The next thing I would have done is probably try to find the next track on the road, and then follow those tracks, scanning madly onto every termite mound or tree or in the grass, hoping to spot that leopard. Freddie did something completely different. Freddie told me to turn the vehicle around and drive back in the opposite direction. So the opposite direction to where those tracks were going. And I've learned now never to question Freddie. But back then I was still a bit young and dumb. And I said, no, but Freddie, the tracks are going this way. And he very politely told me, if we want to find this leopard, we need to turn around and drive back. And the reason being was that about 500 meters back down the road, unbeknownst to me and the guest, we'd been too busy talking, Freddie had taken into account that there was a herd of impalas in the area, not close to the road, quite far, in fact. And we turned around and we drove back to that herd of impalas, and I switched off the car and sort of looked at him to guide me into what was the next step. He took quick did a quick check of the area, took note of which way the wind was blowing, and he said, we need to drive downwind of these impalas. Started driving around through the bush, and very casually that same arm came up, and he just said, there she is. And I looked, and there's the tail of a leopard in the grass stalking these impalas. From one track in the road, Freddie had been able to look at that, zoom in. He displayed another critical characteristic of the top trackers. And that's the ability to be able to zoom in and zoom out in a split second. He spotted that track and he zoomed right in. He said, that track is fairly fresh. There's a leopard somewhere in this area. Then he zoomed out and in a second was able to assimilate all the clues that we very easily overlooked. The impala herd over there, the wind direction, the particular female individual. Having been on this reserve for over 20 years, Freddie has tracked this female a number of different times, and he knows that she's a specialist impala hunter and loves the long grass to launch an attack from. He used all of that knowledge, that all of everything that he'd observed in his 20 odd years of tracking. He was able to rely on that, and from zooming in on that track to zooming out and immediately having an instant recollection of everything that he had learned in all his years of tracking, he was able to find us a leopard. And still to this day, that particular sighting blew my mind purely because of how Freddie was able to find that leopard. So that level of tracking, that level of intuition sets good trackers apart from the great ones. The great trackers have that next level of intuition, that second sight. And to a novice, it appears magical. It almost appears mystical that they're conjuring this up out of nowhere. And I think back to the first time that I ever saw it in action and just being completely blown away. But it's been crafted over decades of remembering what they have observed. It's the attention to the tiniest detail, in addition to remembering what affects the factors like the different seasons, the lay of the land, the time of day. All of those factors have an effect on animal behavior. So that is why I say that it's no less impressive, but it's a crafted art that takes decades to hold on to. So I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of tracking today. The next thing I want to focus on is what is being done in today's world to protect this art, to preserve it. And close to home, there's a Tracker Academy that was started by two very close members of our Londolozi family. The man on the right is known as Alex van der Geefer, and the man on the left is Renius Mhlongo. And they were a ranger tracker team here at Londolozi. And we're very privileged to be associated with the Tracker Academy that they started on their own accord. The two of them bonded like brothers. It took them years and years and years to form that brotherhood. They took time to understand each other. They learned each other's languages. They learned each other's craft. And they also recognized the fact that this ancient art of tracking, which they both had a deep love and passion for, was being lost, and they wanted to do something about it. So instead of me telling you about the Tracker Academy and what it does today, I thought best we hear it from Alex's mouth straight. So I'm going to play a video, and it's about three and a half minutes, and it just gives you a quick background as to the Tracker Academy and what a special organization it is.
Since its inception in 1926, Londolozi has long been associated with the ancient art form of tracking. It's a place where relationships between trackers and rangers and the natural world has been fostered for many, many years now. The Tracker Academy was born out of an incredible relationship that was developed at Londolozi between a ranger and a tracker. Out of this incredible bond that they formed over years and years in the bush together came the desire to preserve this ancient art form.
Because of rapid urbanization in Southern Africa, we've experienced a loss of indigenous knowledge, and with that, traditional skills of tracking. And the only way to restore that is to formalize its training, and that's why we started Tracker Academy.
It's a testament to the magic that can happen between rangers and trackers at a place like Londolozi.
In the 10 years that we've been in existence, we've trained 150 tracker students, of which 135 are today, as we speak, in permanent conservation jobs.
They didn't taught me only tracking, but they also taught me how to look after myself.
I am what I am now because of the Tracker Academy.
They changed my life.
And these young men are shining examples of the potential of this country, and they are an ancient art form preserved inside of a human being. We believe that this organization is doing incredibly important work in the environmental and conservation space right now, but also in the space of nation building.
They don't just train you to become a tracker, but they even train your life, how to be a good person amongst the community.
When I come back to Londolozi and I see how some of the graduates of Tracker Academy have ended up here as trackers, it makes my heart warm. I think there's 13 or 14 tracker graduates working at Londolozi, and they are making a big difference. They bring an energy to what they do. They're finding animals. Many of them have continued to upskill themselves. Some have become guides.
I'm so lucky to be a guide here at Londolozi and work with a tracker who is a graduate from the same academy which I went.
The next step is to advance tracking, to prove that these ancient skills have relevance in modern conservation efforts. Tracker Academy would not have been possible without Gaynor Rupert. She is our guiding light.
So a very, very special organization that we very privileged to be closely associated with, and majority of the trackers in the team that I look after come through from that Tracker Academy and continue to inspire me on a day-to-day basis. I've never learned so much from a group of people than those guys. So to summarize, I mean, I could have got very technical with you today. I could have spoken about, you know, how to age a track, or the gait of an animal and how that tells you whether they're walking fast or slow, if they're stalking or hunting or running. Could have talked about other clues and the lobes, but all of that would not be possible without keeping the art of tracking relevant. And so I want to tell you a story about why it's so important to preserve this ancient craft. And just sitting here at the start of this talk and watching those slides, you know, go over the screen, it's so awesome to hear what you guys are doing in the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society, and especially the youth group of it. It's up to you guys to keep this relevant. It's up to you guys to keep visiting your national parks, to keep talking about conservation related issues, because by keeping these wild spaces open, we are able to preserve this ancient craft amongst a whole host of other benefits. So I just want to thank you all for listening to me today. I also want to, if anyone wants to learn a little bit more about tracking, the tracker manual, which I don't go anywhere without when I'm out in the field, that was the book made by Alex and Renius, and it's a practical guide to all animal tracking in Africa. So if you're wanting to learn a little bit more about the technical aspects, then definitely find a copy of that. And then the one on the right is written by Boyd Varty, and you would have seen him speak in the video before. And he combined his two passions, one being tracking and the other being life coaching and transformation. And he's come up with incredible path or incredible analogies using the art of tracking to help you track your life. And I've found it incredibly beneficial and useful to read it. So yeah, thank you to everyone. I cannot wait to visit Sri Lanka. It's been on my bucket list for years and years and years. And hopefully, yeah, that happens soon. So I'm going to hand over back to Zainab and thank you.
Thank you, James, for that enthralling talk and taking us through the art of tracking and the craft of it and the way you guys go about that entire process. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure we would love to have you in Sri Lanka, and there's a lot we can exchange, I'm sure, with the tracking process that goes on here as well in Sri Lanka. To just start off, I can see some questions are coming into the chat box as well. So when you're out with guests, like how long would you spend tracking a particular animal? Because I'm sure you have constraints to have to come back at a particular time, or you're limited. So how much time would you be able to put into one tracking?
That's a very good question. Yeah. And so basically on average, we have guests, they come and stay with us for 3 to 4 days. So we're crafting an experience around those days. And the important thing here is the relationship that you have with the tracker you work with, because you're ultimately spending 6 to 8 hours every day with that person in the bush. And so you have to be operating on the same page. And we want to try and show people, give them a all-rounded experience. So if we just parked the vehicle and left them for 3 hours, 4 hours, they'd be quite cross with us when we came back and we hadn't found it, and now they've just been sitting getting bored. So it's about finding that balance. And what we do sometimes is I will be driving, and the tracker Rich that I spoke about, he'll be sitting on the front of the seat or the front of the car, and he'll spot some tracks. I'll get off the car and we will have a chat about them. And he'll say, it's either worth following up on these, I think we can find the animal, or he will say, no, they're too old, we're wasting our time, let's keep going. If he says, let's follow, what I will do is I will often walk with him. I'll go and tell the guests, you know, this is the story. We found some fresh tracks and we just want to investigate. And I'll spend 10 to 15 minutes with Rich walking on those tracks, getting an idea of whether we should continue with this trail. And then if it's still good, I will leave Rich by himself, or if there's other trackers in the area, they might come and help him. And I'll return back to the vehicle and continue engaging with the guests, and we might drive around, see what else we can find. But we're also helping Rich by going to check the different water holes and trying to anticipate where that leopard's going. But he could be on that trail for 2-3 hours, and then it's up to me to try and convey to the guests what is happening at each stage and try and build up. And if all goes well and we find the leopard at the end of it, then it's an incredible build-up to a sighting. And you might find that leopard just fast asleep, but being part of that process is incredible. And it's up to us as guides to try and interpret what's happening on the tracking front so that the guests understand what goes into finding these different animals. So yeah, it's all about balance. If you speak to a lot of the trackers, they'll say that they don't get off and walk nearly as much as they'd love to, because it's really what makes them tick every single day. But we want our guests to leave here having had an all-rounded experience. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. I think poaching has become a problem in Africa. It's a huge menace in Southern Africa, especially with rhino poaching, I know. And even in Sri Lanka, we have a lot of incidents with poaching. And I think the art of tracking comes in and plays a critical role when it comes to anti-poaching efforts. I would like to be able to elaborate a little bit on any work that Londolozi is doing, or broadly speaking in Southern Africa, the role of tracking when it comes to anti-poaching efforts, maybe.
Yeah, it's unfortunately one of the harsh realities of the wilderness areas that we operate in, and we do need to try and stay on top of it as much as possible. Being in a private game reserve that we are in, we're very lucky to have a lot more resources at our disposal to fight poaching, and technology is one that we rely on quite heavily. Some of the landowners in the greater area have invested huge amounts of money into beefing up our security systems, fence line technology, because you want to prevent poachers from getting into a reserve as opposed to reacting once they've already shot the rhino, whatever it is. Other national parks like the Kruger National Park, they don't have as much resources at their disposal, and they've got to cover a much greater area of land, which does make it quite a tough job. The reality is that no matter how much technology you have, without the actual boots on the ground, and the boots on the ground I'm talking about are the rangers who are out there weeks at a time, carrying everything that they need and living in the bush. And without those rangers on the ground with that tracking skill, the technology is irrelevant, because they need to get information in their hands as quickly as possible. That's where the technology comes in. And then the tracking comes in when they find those tracks of the poacher, and they can track and find them and hopefully arrest them. They will use, in some parts, they use dogs to help them on that, but they still have to have a very clear idea of how to track a person through the wilderness area. So long story short, here at Londolozi, through tracking and through technology and through some of our landowners, we're very fortunate enough to have been able to create a safe haven for animals, but it's not the case in other parts, and it's something that's constantly on the agenda and one of the biggest conservation issues in South Africa at the moment.
Okay. So South Africa has a reputation globally as being one of the leading destinations for wildlife tourism. And Londolozi in particular, and the Sabi Sands region is renowned. How do you think tracking has helped influence and make this model of tourism such a success? Would you be able to articulate the role of tracking in helping South Africa deliver that more complete and rounded and experience that really does stand out globally?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned right in the beginning, when I introduced myself, when I was a kid, I remember growing up and watching videos that were produced right here at Londolozi, and the videos were made by John Varty, who's one of the owners, and a world-renowned tracker by the name of Almon Mhlongo. And Almon was just one of many trackers at Londolozi at the time who focused on finding leopards. In those days, to see a leopard in these parts was almost impossible. At best, you'd catch a glimpse of it running across the road in front of you. But these dedicated trackers, they spent thousands of hours on foot, painstakingly finding leopards. Once they found a leopard, they'd get a vehicle to where that leopard was. And over time, through a sensitive inch by inch process of getting the vehicle closer, eventually leopards started to relax around the vehicles. And I'm using leopards as an example here because in this area where we find ourselves, that's what we are known for in this greater area. We've got an incredible high density of leopards. And so trackers helps in those early stages habituate the wildlife to the game vehicles. And it means that now when you land at Londolozi and we take you out, and if we're lucky enough to find a leopard, which is pretty much a given, if we will be able to sit with that, we'll be able to sit with that leopard and it won't react to us in any way whatsoever in the vehicle. And that's purely down to all the hard work that the trackers over the many, many years have spent time doing. Painstakingly tracking, spending many hours in the sun, finding animals so that we can get a vehicle there and use it. And it's the reason why we can drive around and we've got animals that are completely wild, completely free roaming, but they do not react to the vehicle because we've been able to approach them in a sensitive way. And I think that's sort of what's happened here at Londolozi, and Londolozi's got one of the richest histories in terms of game reserves in South Africa. And I think a lot of other places over the years have also recognized this need for specialist trackers and have been able to hire some and gone through the similar processes in their natural places. So on a day-to-day basis, how much a tracker is also incredibly skilled at spotting game. So you might have a safari experience where it's bound to the vehicle and the tracker doesn't walk, but he spots some incredible game, and him and the ranger work together. But ultimately, they are responsible for being able to get close to the animals because of all the hard yards that they did, trackers before them did.
Interesting. I saw there's a question that's coming to the chat box that asks about the impact of COVID-19 to the lodge and to the reserve in general. Has it had a positive impact on animals? I'm sure it's very difficult for the business, but what has been the impact on animal behavior? How have you all balanced that?
It is a very interesting question. And when our hard lockdown hit in South Africa in March of last year, we shut our doors. Majority of the staff had to head home, and we had no guests for 7 months. So the impact on the tourism industry, I think globally, one is huge. And we all know the hardships that a lot of people, us included, have been through. From an animal perspective, it was quite interesting. And a bit of an anticlimax, not much changed, to be honest. We just didn't find nearly as many animals because there weren't as many of us driving across the reserve. We're very lucky that the Tracker Academy, they were able to continue with their students at the time. So they played an incredible role in helping us find animals at the time. And our whole strategy changed from taking guests out on drives to we had to take our safaris virtually. And we had to find animals and pretty much show the world that the animals were still here. So certainly what I experienced is that animal behavior did not change at all. And what we found at the lodge is that because of a lot less people traffic around, a lot more animals felt more comfortable to walk through the lodge. So we had some pretty interesting encounters as we walked around the lodge at night and saw leopards crossing the paths in front of us, which still happens, but it certainly happened a lot more. So for me, that was probably the biggest change, and into the human spaces, animals felt more comfortable because there weren't as many people there. But in the bush, when we found animals out on game drive or when we were walking, their behavior didn't change much at all. And so the biggest, I'd say the biggest impact that animals had because of COVID-19 was the danger that these lodges and these companies and these organizations wouldn't be able to sustain themselves and to continue protecting the animals by having people paying their hard-earned money to come and view these animals. So that was the biggest threat to animals, was not having guests here. And so when we were able to open up to guests again in October of last year, it was an incredible feeling that people were now coming back to this place. And by extension, we felt that now we were in better position to protect these animals.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting because it's very similar in Sri Lanka as well, because I think just having people around, having visitors in an indirect way is an enforcement mechanism. It helps with protection of these animals in their natural habitats. It's interesting you mentioned how they would venture into closer to the lodge. I think we saw some of those videos on Instagram and on WhatsApp. It was getting forwarded here as well, of leopards walking by the swimming pool, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is very cool. Something a little different in terms of wild dogs. I know Londolozi is a place you can see wild dogs still, and I believe there are less than 500 wild dogs left in South Africa probably today. Is there any insights you could share about the conservation of this species and canids in general? Because I think people in Sri Lanka are also interested in studying species such as jackals, and any insights you have, because those are fascinating animals as well.
Yeah.
There's anything.
Yeah.
In terms of tracking as well.
Yeah, they are very hard to track. You can imagine a pack of 10 wild dogs running, and they're very hyperactive, and they all pick up a different scent, and they all run in different directions and cross over each other. So tracking wild dogs on foot is very tough. But yeah, just to go back to the question on the species, and you're absolutely correct. I think they're regarded as the second most endangered species, as predator species in Africa, and only about 500 left, which is nothing really. And there are some incredible organizations that research them, and we play a part because on the ground we're fortunate enough to see wild dogs here, and so we play our part by recording any sightings that we have and feeding it back to these organizations and any observations from the field that might help. We were incredibly fortuitous last year, and it was a bit of a shame for all the guests and the other rangers who weren't here at the time. But for the first time in 10 years, in the heart of the middle of lockdown, we found a wild dog den on the reserve at Londolozi. And so we had complete unrestricted access with this. And it was just a pair, an alpha male and female, which is usually unusual. They're pack animals, so you often find them 6 to 8 strong, even more than that. But we watched for about 2-3 months as this pair raised a litter of pups, 10 pups, until they became independent and left the den. And but as luck would have it, this year we've also got a wild dog den that was discovered in the southern reaches of the reserve. So everyone got very excited that they could spend some time. And if you go onto our Instagram or YouTube channels, you'll see some of the footage that we've got around that den. So unfortunately with wild dogs, the best way to conserve wild dogs, and it goes for a lot of animals in fact, is habitat preservation. Because wild dogs, they have huge ranges that they're not territorial unless they are bound to a den site and are raising pups, and they'll spend 2 to 3 months there. But then those pups become independent and they will move far and wide in their range. And so the biggest advantage to wild dog success is having huge areas of land. Once they get out of fenced in reserves, they are incredibly devastating to livestock, and they can wipe out entire herds of goats and sheep, which makes them quite heavily persecuted outside of protected areas, because you don't want your entire livelihood destroyed by a pack of wild dogs. So any initiatives that go to expanding wild areas, dropping fences, anything like that, that can only help wild dog populations. And in the meantime, we just continue to take our observations from what we see here at Londolozi and feed it back to other great organizations that are doing phenomenal work at understanding them some more, protecting them and monitoring them.
Thank you. You spoke about some hairy encounters that some of the trackers in the past have had, been trapped in a boma especially and cornered by a black mamba. That was terrifying to hear. But would you have any personal stories you would like to share with our audience today in terms of any hairy encounters you may have had spending so much time in the bush?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you about the first scary encounter that I'd say I ever really had. I was a lot less mature in those days, I would say. It was when I started my guiding career. I was 23 years old, and it was at this reserve called Phinda where I started. And I was very fortunate enough to be paired with an old Zulu man. Well, he wasn't that old. He'd probably hate me for saying that, but he was in his 60s. He'd been tracking for many, many years, and he was from the area, and I learned a lot from him in my early years of guiding. He was the first experienced person that I spent a lot of time with in the bush, and we took guests around and we would go out by ourselves together, and I would learn a lot from him. And one of the first things he taught me was how to respond when a male lion is charging at you. And so we'd been driving along, and I had guests on the vehicle, and he stopped me and he said, "There's some fresh lion tracks in here." And I got off and I was very excited. I was ready just to start running in on the tracks. I wanted to find this lion and be the big hero and show my guests what we had found together. And the first thing he taught me was just to calm down, and let's start to think about the bigger pictures. Let's zoom out. And so he looked at the tracks. He said they were fresh enough and that the two of us should go and investigate. So I went back to the car. I said to my guest, look, this is the story. We found fresh tracks of a single male lion. He's crossed over the road and he's gone into this area off to our right. I'm going to park you here in the shade. I'm not going to be gone for more than 15 minutes. And I changed the radio channel to not the main channel where everyone talks, but a separate channel where myself and the guests could talk and I could keep them updated on the tracks as we went. And Dan was the name of the tracker I was working with, and he was walking in front of me and he was focused on the tracks and looking around, and I was walking behind him with my rifle. And we tracked for a while, and to this day, I remember exactly where we were and what the bush looked like. And it was the area of broadleaf woodland. And it was soft, sandy soils, and we're tracking this male lion. I was following Dan as he was tracking this male lion. And I was trying to scan around, and we came around this thicket, and I looked up ahead, about 20, 30 meters up ahead, and Dan saw it at the same time. And it was this beautiful male lion in his prime, and he'd managed to take down an Inyala, which is one of the typical antelope you find in that habitat. Big male Inyala, and he just made this kill. So he was even more protective than usual. He was by himself, so he was wondering if there were any other rival lions in the area. So he was a bit agitated. He'd had all this adrenaline of making the kill, and around the corner came myself and Dan, and this male lion looked up and he took one look at us and he just set off straight for us. And luckily, through the training, you read in the book about how male lions will try and scare you as much as possible, which is not hard for them to do at all. And so everything about that charge was a mock charge. It was a show of bravado. He was, in essence, telling us to get the hell out of there. We do not belong there. And when a lion comes charging at you, you listen to him. But me and my youth at the time and my naivety, I was stumbling around. I was wanting to run. Didn't know where to look. I tried to scream, but no words came out. Dan had this happen to him numerous times, and he turned around, took one look at me, and he just laughed at me in a very sweet way. We joked about it afterwards. And the first thing he did was he just walked behind me and he grabbed my belt, because at that stage I had my rifle up, aimed at the lion. Definitely didn't want to shoot it, but I did not know what else to do, and this was my only form of protection. And Dan casually just grabbed my belt and he slowly just walked me, because one of the worst things you can do when a lion is running at you is to turn tail and run yourself, because that's what a lion's prey does. And so if we turned and ran, he probably would have followed through with the charge. So Dan stopped me in my tracks. He grabbed my belt, and slowly by slowly, he just walked me back towards the car. And through this whole time, my guests, they could see us. We were quite far from the vehicle, but they could just see my cap above a bush. And they were radioing frantically, trying to work out what was going on. And I wasn't able to talk at that stage. And I got back to the car without saying much. I just held my hand up, and it was doing one of these numbers, shaking uncontrollably. And that was how they realized that we had found the lion. And luckily, the nerves calmed down a bit. We were able to drive the car in and get a phenomenal view of a male lion. But that incident will stay in my mind forever, and it certainly was one of the biggest learning curves that I've had in the bush.
Wow. Wow. Okay, so I know we didn't go into much detail about the technical aspects of tracking, but the question that has come in from a few people is in terms of how would you age footprint and time it back? Would you be able to share some insights on that? All right.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we spoke a lot about the top trackers and their, in-depth knowledge of the areas that they work, the lay of the land, the different soil types. So one of the first things is soil type or substrate, and that plays a part in aging of tracks. If an animal is walking on a very hard, rocky surface, it's almost impossible to see the tracks. But if they're walking on a very you can picture that fine dust on a road where it's just settled on the first sort of couple of millimeters above the surface, very fine substrate. And if an animal walks there, you can see its imprint very carefully. But it can sometimes be quite hard to age that, because it stays preserved for quite a bit longer unless you've got wind. So substrates plays a part in aging tracks. Wind plays a big part, because you could have a leopard walk past, and you could look where he stepped, you know, maybe 1 minute ago. And if it's a windy day, the track's already been covered by sand and all of that. So that again talks to being able to zoom out and know what the conditions of the day mean for the track. So substrate, wind can age tracks a bit, can help you age tracks a bit. Rain, sometimes, you know, you're trying to work out when an animal's walked here, you remember that it rained about an hour or two back, and you can see in the track a couple of droplets of rain, so you can work out that this leopard moved here maybe sometime before the rain, because rain has dropped on top. If the ground is wet completely and it stopped raining, and you see when animals walked, and as it's walked, it's sort of unearthed a bit of the dry sand from underneath the track, and you can see that, then you know it stopped raining 10 minutes ago, so this leopard's fresh, we need to go and find it. That plays a big part. Understanding when different animals move around and at what time of day. So there's, as I'm sure is the case in Sri Lanka, with you get animals moving around in the day and nocturnal animals at night. And so if you're tracking a leopard in the morning and it's, you know, 9 o'clock in the morning, and you're walking and you come across its track, and you can see the track of a large spotted genet, which is one of the nocturnal animals, you can deduce that most likely this leopard only walked at the night, in nighttime, because that's when the genet is active, and so it would have had to walk across the track. Impalas walking over tracks, if it's around a busy waterhole that you know there's a lot of traffic of animals coming down to that waterhole, but you see leopard tracks undisturbed on top of all the other tracks, you know that it's a short amount of time has passed, because there hasn't been any time for other animals to walk on top of those leopard tracks. So yeah, those are just a few of the different ways to age tracks. It's not a perfect science, that's for sure, and it certainly takes a lot of practice. And I've learned from Rich, when I see a leopard walking and I'm safely able to go and have a look at the track, I look at it and see, you know, if I came here, would I be able to say that that was a fresh track? Sometimes I get it right, sometimes I don't. So it's a work in progress, that's for sure, and it takes many years to perfect that art of aging a track.
Wow, I think we can take maybe one more question or a couple more. You have time? You all right?
Yeah,
Please?
I've got time for a couple more questions.
Yeah. So I think you spoke a lot about intuition and the power of intuition and the importance of it when it comes to tracking, and you illustrated it with the example of Freddie tracking that leopard. Is this something you can really teach somebody, or how do you all go about that process at the academy, especially teaching, and how to come about that process in terms of understanding intuition and following your intuition? Or is that just something that's born in somebody, and they just have that ability? So what is your guess and take on that?
Yeah, I think deep down everyone's got that ability, but it's often, time is an incredible thing, and in today's busy world, we always have an excuse that there's not enough time. And so, I look at myself, for example, I'm nowhere near in the same league as all the trackers in the team. But I don't spend every day honing that craft. And you can teach people the fundamentals of tracking, and then it's up to them about how much they really want something. And so you can give them the tracker manual, and you can say, go and work out what all the different tracks are. You can make flashcards, and you can be able to identify the tracks. But unless you're out actively training, actively trailing something day to day, and it's what drives you, you've got to have a passion, and so intuition you can't teach, but if you want something bad enough, if you have that thirst for knowledge, if you are curious about the natural world, then over time it's very likely that you could develop those same levels of intuition. You obviously have to have the wilderness areas at your disposal, places where you work, and some of the best trackers, they go out for, resign for a year or two and go and do something else, and then come back, and it takes them a while to get back into their stride. So intuition you can't teach, but I think we all have that ability to develop it inside of ourselves. It just depends how much of a thirst for knowledge and curiosity, and how much you actually want it, and how much it sets your soul on fire, how much you love it, I suppose.
Yeah, I can relate to the passion, because I always feel like the best guides and trackers I have spent time with have that very visible passion and a love for what they do. And I think that's really important. In Sri Lanka, unfortunately, in our parks, fortunately rather, or unfortunately, however you want to take it, we can't really track on foot. So a lot of the tracking that happens in the vehicles. So would you be able to elaborate in terms of how the experience is different when you track by foot or go by vehicle? Is there differences or similarities?
There definitely are some similarities, and I've been fortunate enough to, well, not fortunate enough to actually spend time in Sri Lanka, but speak to a couple of people who've had some amazing experiences in Vilpatu and Yala, and it's just whet my appetite for trying to get there. And they speak about trackers there who also develop a level of intuition, a level of second sight, and they're bound to the vehicles. So what I would assume is that, you know, it's all about getting to understand your patch of turf, your the lay of the land. And yes, you might not have as much access to the lay of the land, but there will still be clues that, you know, the novice will overlook, that the trackers there will pick up, and, you know, they will use what they have in front of them. It might be a road network, it might be a knowledge of water holes, it might be a knowledge of observed behavior that they've seen in a number of the different females, because I understand that there's a lot of research going into it, and people have been documenting the different individuals that walk around Yala. So it definitely is a very, you know, there's a lot of similarities there. And I firmly believe that if you were to take some of those top vehicle-bound trackers and, you know, give them access to being able to walk and explore, they would develop that side of tracking very quickly because of what they've already observed and used. So yes, it is different. And yes, the feeling of finding a track and staying on that track for 3 hours gives you a different idea of what that animal's done and moved, and where it slept and what it ate, and what its behavior was. And so that's something that you're not going to get, you know, just from the vehicle, but there's still an intense level of skill needed to find leopards just being based on the vehicle. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah, I think that covers it well. Thank you. Also, just, I know you spoke a lot about the leopards, and Londolozi and Sabi Sand is just very famous for its leopards, and what John Varty did with Mother Leopard, I think, has kind of helped give it that status in terms of putting Londolozi on the map with leopards. So would you have some insights in terms of following a leopard through the course of its life so closely, and that process, how does that go about? I know you touched on it a little bit earlier as well, but if you give us further insight, because I think a lot of people on this talk today spend a lot of time tracking leopards in Yala and Vilpatu especially, and in other places in Sri Lanka. So that would be interesting to hear more about that.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I didn't realize would really touch me when I started guiding. You know, that just seeing a leopard or a lion, you know, in one sighting, it's special. But being able to live in an area and be able to track the lives of these different individuals over the time really is quite special. It's when I first, you know, I've been at Londolozi for 6 years, and I see a leopard on game drive, and I can picture what it looked like as a cub. And so that, I think, being able to document the lives of these leopards for as long as we have, 50 years, it's meant that in essence, we're part of the longest running research program of leopards anywhere, because each year we will produce an identikit of the different leopards and their territories. And obviously it's very fluid and it changes from time to time, but being able to have cars going out, people that have spent years here following the lives of these different individuals, it helps us better understand the species, and all of it gets fed back to Panthera, which is the largest big cat research organization. So on a personal note, it's incredible to look at an individual leopard that you followed for 6 years and immediately recall all the different sightings. And it certainly helps from a tracking perspective, because you pick up little traits and habits that that differs between individuals. But it's so much more than just being able to get attached to an individual. Leopards are secretive, solitary animals, as you know, and so to have the level of access that we do with a relaxed population of leopards around vehicles, who still secretive and solitary by nature, but we're able to observe things that we wouldn't get to see anywhere else.
I think we'll take one more final question for today, and I think let's end with the question in terms of how can you go about the process if you want to become a tracker or a ranger or guide? What is the process to get you there, and how did you go about that process yourself?
So I think the first thing, first and foremost, regardless of age, is if something excites you, do everything you can to find out more about it. And you can start right in your own garden. Start by making a list of birds in your own garden, working out what all the different trees are in your garden. You don't have to be in a game reserve to be able to start fostering this love for the bush. And that's the first thing that everyone can do. In South Africa, you have to be 21 years old to be able to guide, and there's a couple of legal requirements like first aid and public driving permits and things like that we have to get. But then you don't have to study anything in particular. Yes, it can help you in certain parts, but finding a place that is going to be the right fit for you. So, you can go explore many different game reserves, and many different organizations and companies. So it's finding a group of people that you connect with and an area that you'd like to work. And then in terms of guiding, it's just immersing yourself daily into everything that place has to offer. Learn your patch of turf is one of the best things that you can do. So, I'm not sure what the requirements are in Sri Lanka, but in South Africa, there's also a Field Guides Association of South Africa. So we do exams and practical assessments, which give us different qualifications that are needed to guide. And then at Londolozi, we run our own guide training program. So we will look for people that we think fit our culture, who will be the right fit for Londolozi, and vice versa. Londolozi has to be the right fit for them. And then they will come here, and we put them through a training course that can take 6 months before they actually start guiding. And it's an incredible time. When you're a trainee, all you want to do is qualify and become a ranger. But when you're a ranger, you long for the days of training where your sole purpose is just to learn as much as possible without any of the other pressures that come from a busy lodge. So everything from rifle handling, learning about the vehicles, trailing animals and tracking them on foot, how to react around different animals when you are on foot, constantly boosting your knowledge, and constantly writing things down. Because, as I said, the top trackers are able to look back for, on all their years of guiding, and whether they've written stuff down in notebooks or they, photographic memory, whatever it is, it's that ability to be able to recollect past observations. So that's more ranger. From the tracker point of view, you saw that video on the Tracker Academy, and that is pretty much, they interview hundreds of people each year for 16 spots. So it's, and the reason why it's so few is they want the quality of the trackers coming out after that year to, never drop. And that's the sweet spot that they've found at the moment. And that's pretty much the requirements there. Is you have to have been living in a community that's nearby to these wilderness areas. And then they don't pay, they go through an interview process, and then they don't pay to go on the Tracker Academy. They get selected, and it's a year-long course in 2 different areas, one being at Londolozi for 6 months, and then they go to another area called in the Karoo, which is the southeastern parts of the country. So they're able to hone their skills in 2 different areas, and that just cements the fundamentals, and then it's up to them where they get placed or where they end up finding jobs. It's up to them to continue that. It's only the first rung of the knowledge journey, and there's still a long way to go.
I think, as you have emphasized many times today, it's a constant journey of learning and understanding, because I'm sure the bush never ceases to surprise you. You always go and there's always something new you see, and I think that's what makes it so special and gets us going out all the time. We're able to spend so much time out there. Thank you for this really, really wonderful conversation and talk today. It has been an absolute pleasure for the WNPS and for the Youth Wing especially to host you for this masterclass in wildlife tracking. So thank you, James, and thank you to the audience who has joined us today as well.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, thanks for listening and for having me, and hopefully I get to Sri Lanka soon.
We would love to have you and would love to host you. So let's plan something for when the world gets back into a better routine and can travel again.
Yeah, can't wait. Well, thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.